Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Books in Bytes, where we take a deep dive into The Coming of the Third Reich by Richard John Evans. Now, this is a truly monumental work. It doesn't just, list events. It meticulously unpacks how this initially pretty insignificant radical right party managed to grab power. And maybe even more importantly, why so many Germans, really across the board, just didn't see the disaster coming until it was far too late. So our mission in this deep dive is to guide you through Evans's really rich history, pull out the key insights, and give you a clear chronological sense of the complex choices and factors that led to catastrophe. And crucially, avoid that trap of thinking it was all somehow inevitable.
Exactly. And what's so brilliant about Evans's approach, I think, is how he weaves together the big picture, the analytical sweep, with these really personal stories, officials, ordinary people. He makes it so clear that people living through it just couldn't see things the way we can looking back. And he keeps reminding us, look, at so many points, things could have gone very differently. So we're going to try and pull out those specific nuggets, help you get a handle on this huge complexity without hopefully feeling too overwhelmed.
And to really understand the how and why, we actually need to rewind quite a bit, way before the Nazis were even a thing, back to Imperial Germany. We're talking late 19th, early 20th century. Bismarck's unified Germany, forged back in 1871, was this formidable European power, built on military muscle, definitely. But its constitution was interesting, wasn't it? It deliberately limited parliament's power, kept the big decisions, war, peace, army stuff, firmly with the monarch, the Kaiser.
Absolutely. And Evans makes this crucial point that later generations often forgot Bismarck's own very pragmatic view politics is the art of the possible. But despite that pragmatism, the military shadow loomed large, especially in Prussia. Huge prestige from the unification wars, Military ideas of honor seeped into everything. And politically, it was fragmented, lots of conservative, liberal parties. And then the Social Democrats, a massive movement. But, well, the establishment never really accepted them, always seen as somehow illegitimate, suspect. Judges, police, officials, before 1914, they were deeply wary.
Yeah, and it's during this late imperial time that Evans really starts digging into the roots of anti-Semitism. He's very careful to distinguish, the older Christian-based prejudice from this newer, much nastier racial anti-Semitism. You get figures like Herman Allwards, the headmaster, believe it or not, who even embezzled funds, or Wilhelm Marr, who actually founded a league of anti-Semites, pushing these racial theories.
Right. And initially, it was pretty fringe stuff. But Evans shows how some ideas, like this notion of a Jewish spirit being somehow fundamentally alien to German culture, started to creep into the mainstream. You mentioned Wagner earlier. His later views got increasingly racist, partly influenced by his wife Cosima.
It wasn't just anti-Semitism, though, was it? This racial thinking bled into other areas.
Oh, definitely. It alarmingly connected with the rise of racial hygiene, eugenics. Thinkers like Ernst Haeckel, known for his racist views too, and Alfred Plutz, founder of the Racial Hygiene Society. They were openly pushing for the state to manage the population, supposedly for national efficiency. Chilling stuff, really, calling for sterilizing the unfit. Yeah. And while some of Haeckel's own followers actually became pacifists, bizarrely, these broader ideas about racial management kept spreading. At the same time, you had this aggressive nationalism bubbling up, Pan-Germanism, Bernhard von Bülow talking about Germany needing its place in the sun, colonies like Karl Peters in Africa. And at home, a push to Germanize minorities, groups trying to stamp out Polish identity. Heinrich Class, a big pan-German voice, even proposed stripping Jews of civil rights, classifying them as aliens, banning the Social Democrats outright.
So these were really radical ideas for the time.
Incredibly radical. Evans really stresses that, pushing extreme policies at home and abroad, and sort of gradually making extremist thought seem more normal.
Then comes the First World War, 1914 to 1918. And that just changes everything, doesn't it?
Irrevocably. It didn't just cement militarism. It, quite shockingly, seemed to legitimize violence in politics. Public talk was filled with war metaphors. Opponents were enemies to be smashed. Politics became, as someone put it, war pursued by other means.
And during the war itself, there was Ludendorff's silent dictatorship.
Yes, pulling the strings on war aims, foreign policy, ruthlessly exploiting occupied places like France and Belgium for resources, total war footing.
So when Germany finally loses in 1918, the shock must have been immense.
Unbelievable. Bismarck's whole system just collapsed overnight. The Kaiser abdicated, a total power vacuum.
And that's fertile ground for the stab-in-the-back myth.
Precisely. This poisonous lie that Germany wasn't really defeated militarily, but betrayed from within by Jews, by socialists. Evans shows how widely this was believed, especially by returning soldiers, like Hitler himself. It cemented his fanaticism.
And the immediate aftermath was chaos, right? The November Revolution.
Utter turmoil. 1918, 1919. Brutal street fighting, like the Spartacist uprising in Berlin, a radical left revolt. And the Social Democratic government actually used right-wing militias, these free corps units, ex-soldiers, to crush these uprisings.
You're like in Munich.
Exactly. A terrible example in Munich. Over 1,000 Red Army members just slaughtered. This violence created this deep, lasting hatred between communists and social democrats. Evans argues this division was absolutely tragic for the Republic's future. They could never unite against the real threat later.
And then, as if things weren't bad enough, you get the Treaty of Versailles in 1919.
Oh, yeah. The diktat, as the Germans called it, met with just sheer horror across the board. The reparations, losing territory like Alsace-Lorraine and Danzig, crippling military limits, no air force. It just poured fuel on the nationalist fire.
And the ban on uniting with Austria, that must have stung too.
Hugely. Widespread popular desire for it, but banned. It became this constant source of bitterness. And the ongoing Allied occupation of Western Germany, especially by the French, just kept that resentment simmering. Made even former pacifists feel intensely patriotic again, as Evans puts it.
So the Weimar Republic starts life under just immense pressure.
Inherently fragile right from the get-go, plagued by political violence, assassinations, Walter Rathenau, the Jewish foreign minister, killed. And as Evans shows, the institutions weren't really behind it. The civil service, the army, lots of them were still monarchists or sympathetic to the right, not committed to democracy at all.
Like President Hindenburg.
Hindenburg is a prime example. Elected in 25, his sort of ambiguous stance, his fundamentally anti-democratic leanings, well, they proved disastrous. And the courts. Shocking bias. Incredibly lenient on right-wing political murderers' acquittals. A few months in prison, maybe? But leftists, pacifists, prosecuted harshly for treason. Thousands of warrants, over 1,000 convictions against leftists in just 4 years.
It sends a clear message, doesn't it? That right-wing violence is sort of tolerated.
Exactly. It's systematically eroded any faith in the democratic system and dangerously emboldened the extremists. It basically told them they could get away with it.
Then, 1923. Hyperinflation. This feels like another body blow.
Oh, it was catastrophic. Not just economically, but psychologically. Deeply personal. Evans uses Victor Klemperer's diaries brilliantly here. Astronomical prices, money losing value by the hour, people just scrambling. Klemperer writes about the dollar hitting over 800 million marks, affecting his daily food.
That kind of trauma, losing everything overnight almost.
It creates this widespread cynicism, this deep yearning for something solid, for idealism, self-sacrifice, patriotic dedication, a desperate search for meaning in the chaos, an intense hatred for perceived profiteers.
And amidst all this economic turmoil, there's this vibrant but controversial Weimar culture scene.
Yeah, daddyists, Brecht, jazz, sexually explicit plays. But it sparked a huge conservative backlash, seen as decadent, un-German. Tied into fears about a crisis of masculinity, reactions against feminism, the growing gay rights movement, Magnus Hirschfeld's institute was pioneering but shocking to many conservatives.
They were genuinely appalled by open sexuality, relaxed abortion laws.
Absolutely. And meanwhile, Evans points out, the universities were becoming hotbeds for the extreme right. Churning out graduates who were anti-democratic, saw themselves as a kind of elite destined to lead Germany back.
And anti-Semitism is bubbling up again, too.
Broadening, definitely. Often fueled by the arrival of Jewish immigrants from Eastern Europe, easy scapegoats for populist demagogues.
Okay, so the Republic is incredibly shaky. Then comes the Great Depression in 1929.
The final catalyst, almost. Devastating. By 1932, about 1 in 3 German workers is unemployed. 1 in 3. Far worse than any previous crisis. This economic collapse just seemed to confirm that the Republic meant failure. It magnified that trauma of hyperinflation, deepened social unrest everywhere, and just shredded what little legitimacy the Republic had left.
And right into this perfect storm steps Adolf Hitler.
Exactly. Austrian by birth, remember. His war experience, his fanatical belief in the stab-in-the-back myth, they cemented his extreme anti-Semitism and his absolute conviction in propaganda's power. He spells it out in Mein Kampf, chillingly.
His aims weren't just fixing Versailles, were they?
No, far beyond that. Annihilation of the Jews, conquering living space in Russia. And he believed propaganda had to hit the emotions, not reason. Be relentless. Never admit a glimmer of doubt.
And the early Nazi party, the NSDAP.
It grew out of that whole far-right scene in Munich.
Yeah.
quickly became Hitler's personal vehicle, really, for his captivating public speaking, attracted people like Goebbels, a very effective speaker despite his disability, and Gregor Strasser, the organizer.
And the failed beer hall push in 23, that seemed like a disaster for them.
It did initially. Ludendorff was even involved, bizarrely. But Hitler's trial, he got off incredibly lightly, and it led him to a crucial strategic shift. He realized he couldn't take power by force without army support. So he pivoted to this legal path, winning mass support through relentless propaganda.
And the party started growing.
How? Through just tireless activism, constant marching, rallies, street fights. Evans notes their smart targeting, focusing on rural Protestant areas, especially in the north, where farmers were hit hard by the agricultural crisis and were really receptive.
And the violence was always there, wasn't it? The SA, the SS.
Oh, constantly. They were a familiar, intimidating presence. Beatings, stabbings, arrests, things. Evans points out that for many young activists, this violence was the point. It gave their lives meaning. They wore their injuries like badges of honor, the old fighters.
So how did they go from this fringe group to the largest party? It seems so fast.
It was incredibly fast. By 1929, they had significant support. Then the 1930 election boom, from 12 seats to 107. By July 1932, 290 seats, the largest party by far. Evans argues they were masters at tailoring their message, appealing to contradictory feelings, anti-big business, but also anti-Marxist, so they could pull votes from almost everywhere, including many working-class people.
A vague message people could read into.
Exactly. A vague program, mix of old and new symbols. People projected their hopes onto it, and crucially, they projected this image of energy, decisiveness, youth, something the old, tired parties just couldn't match. Strength against perceived weakness.
So the stage is set for the actual seizure of power. January 1933.
Yes. Hitler appointed Chancellor by Hindenburg. Many conservatives like Papin thought they could control him, box him in. A catastrophic miscalculation.
And then, almost immediately, the Reichstag fire. February 33.
A pivotal moment, almost certainly set by one man, Marinus van der Lubbe, acting alone. But the Nazis exploited it instantly. It was the perfect pretext.
For the emergency decree.
Exactly. The decree for the protection of people and state. Suspended basic civil liberties, freedom of speech, assembly, press, allowed the central government to override the states. This decree became the legal fig leaf for so much of the terror that followed. Goebbels unleashed this huge propaganda wave, claiming a Bolshevik revolution was imminent. Utter fabrication.
And the March 33 election happened under these conditions.
Yes, amidst widespread Nazi violence, suppression of opponents. Yet, even then, incredibly, they still didn't get an outright majority on their own.
But they got the Enabling Act passed.
Through sheer intimidation. March 1933. Evans details how Center Party deputies, liberal deputies, were literally threatened. Hitler spoke of a potential bloodbath. They were cowed into voting for it. And that act basically let Hitler rule by decree, bypass parliament entirely, game over for parliamentary democracy. The Reichstag became irrelevant.
And this kicked off coordination, Gleichschaltung.
Yes, the systematic takeover, trade unions, gone. Smashed after May Day 1933. Offices ransacked, leaders arrested, some murdered like Georg Landgraf. Just brutal efficiency. All other political parties dismantled. Center, state, People's Party, even their nationalist allies. Pressure, intimidation, voluntary dissolution, until only the Nazi Party was legal.
And state institutions, too.
Everything. Federal states, professions, local councils, all rapidly brought into line, taken over by Nazi loyalists.
And culture wasn't spared either. Goebbels' ministry.
Popular enlightenment and propaganda. Its job was to purge the un-German spirit, systematically removing Jews, modern art, atonal music, abstract painting, anything deemed degenerate from public life. You had the infamous book burnings, dismissal of brilliant Jewish academics like Einstein, James Frank, pressure on artists like Max Beckmann, all framed as returning Germany to its true self.
Chilling. And the racial hygiene laws moved quickly, too.
Very quickly. The law for the prevention of hereditarily diseased offspring, compulsory sterilization. Evans points out this gained traction during the Depression, with mental asylums filling up. It tragically normalized the idea of eliminating undesirable lives.
And the specific anti-Jewish measures escalated just as fast.
Rapidly and systematically. The state-backed boycott of Jewish businesses in April 33. Then the law for the restoration of a professional civil service, purging Jews and the politically unreliable from government jobs, law, medicine. Some initial exemptions, but the direction was clear. Eastern European Jews lost citizenship quickly. And Evans stresses the constant barrage of anti-Semitic propaganda everywhere, combined with state-sanctioned exclusion, just became the horrifying new normal for Jews across Germany.
So Evans concludes this Nazi revolution wasn't quite a classic overthrow.
No, not in the sense of completely destroying old structures. It was more of transformation. They co-opted institutions where they could, dismantled them brutally where they couldn't, often using this legalistic fig leaf to give their actions a thin veneer of legitimacy, even while using naked terror.
And that terror, that violence, was key from the start.
Absolutely central. Evans makes it crystal clear. The fear generated by Nazi violence, the beatings, torture, murders, starting right from February 1933, was indispensable. It silenced opposition through raw terror, but also through this twisted perception of legality. Even though these actions were flagrantly illegal by previous standards, they were allowed to happen, allowed to become the new terrible norm.
If we pull back for a second, then Evans is saying Nazism's rise wasn't just about Hitler or the economy or one mistake.
No, it was this terrifying perfect storm, a culmination of deep historical roots, political divisions, economic trauma, this gradual acceptance, even embrace of violence in public life. And all of this was just masterfully exploited by a movement that combined this fanatical, destructive ideology with utterly ruthless, pragmatic, and brutal tactics to get power.
So thinking about this now, what does it leave us with? This deep dive into the coming of the Third Reich, it really makes you think. If a society that loves great music, art, literature, if that's no guarantee against violence and dictatorship, then what does it take? What does it truly take for any society, including our own, to recognize and resist those seeds of barbarism before they take root and bloom?
That's the unsettling question, isn't it?
It really is a question that definitely echoes through history and, well, demands our attention today.